I'm going to hold that to when we get to that area, because that's a whole other ball of wax. Jeff Cavins has an explanation for that. He explains that in here. He gives the other theories as well, and that's basically what I'm going to do as well. So I'm going to hold off on that. She asked, what about the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6? What is the Catholic position of that? Nephilim is the Hebrew word which means great ones. It is translated in the King James Bible and the Douay-Rheims translation as giants. It says there were giants in the earth in those days. What does that mean? Okay? So we'll get to that. We'll just hold off on that. But this was a marvelous display. I mean, there was an image of the high priest in full garment in here. I didn't have the picture, like I said, this is just the teaser. But there was a whole presentation given about the different areas of the tabernacle. It was quite a performance. It was really quite something to see, you know. So anyway, so that was my trip. So I had both Catholic and Protestant kind of side trip here, but I wanted to share some of this because I knew we're in this talking about, and here are some Christians who don't take this like we do as poetry. They take it literally. I mean literally. And as a result, this is how they express their faith in the books of Genesis. Now, I used to be of that ilk. I used to think that. I'm now, understanding the church's position, it's a lot more reasonable in my mind. You don't have to say that all scientists are under a conspiracy. I think that that's a little bit too far-fetched. And with our revelation, our understanding of how to read the Bible, I think is much more consistent and, again, reasonable than to be very literalistic, which I don't believe it is. It's meant to be that way. You look at the first six days of creation, and it's all about God creating form and filling it. That's what it is. Okay? It had nothing to do with the science of evolution or anything to that nature. It's meant to tell you how God fashioned the world from nothing into an order that's filled, that everyone could understand at all times. See, the Bible is meant to be read throughout all centuries. It's not meant to be understood just for us. Okay? That's why, even when I was an evangelical, I couldn't take seriously some of the Bible prophecy preachers that would read the book of Revelation and say, oh, the locusts that come out of the bottomless pit, well, these are demon-possessed helicopters. Because John lived in the first century. You didn't know what a helicopter looked like. And oh, if I was there, it looks like a giant bug. So that's what he described it as. Well, now we know it's a helicopter. So this is describing red China coming across the Euphrates in helicopters and blazing fire and stuff. And that's what John saw. And he just wrote it as locusts. Well, again, I think that you're reading too much into it. Would someone in the Middle Ages think that? No. Well then, if it was not understandable in the Middle Ages, but only for us, then why have it? You mean for thousands of years, Christians couldn't understand this part of the Bible because now we have helicopters? You see what I mean? This is what I call 20th century bias reading. You put on your 20th century glasses and you look into the Bible and you critique it based on that, rather than let the Bible speak for itself from the time that it spoke. And that's a serious affront to the scriptures themselves. You have to let the Bible speak for itself. You can't put your own words into it. Otherwise, again, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. Yes?
Okay, Chip, so I teach the first graders over here in catechism.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point then do we say that it becomes real? Does the book of Exodus then become more of a history book, and the book of Genesis is strictly more of a poetry?
Well, not all of it is poetry.
Is there
Yes.
a delineation?
Yes. According to Pius XII in his encyclical, Humani Generis, he said the first 11 chapters of Genesis were written in this kind of poetic fashion. Why first 11? Well, the first 11 chapters of Genesis are the creation, the fall, Cain and Abel, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. After that, we start the history of Abraham. That's chapter 12. Abraham begins a different approach to the story in Genesis. It is more historical in what we would understand as history. It's not poetic, it's history. So at the point of chapter 12, which is the foundation of Judaism, that's historical and moves forward. But prior to that, there's still historical events. Don't get me wrong, okay? It's not mythology, that's different. We're talking about real history. It's just being told in a poetic manner. It's told in a poetic manner, not necessarily literal. Okay? Are we good with this? Mm-hmm. Okay? It's important that that gets told in that manner. Okay? Now, for me personally, in this reporter's opinion, I think that I lean more towards accepting the more, I hesitate to use the word literal, but for a lack of it, more literal than not. But I'm not going to live or die on that. Because the church, it says that we have that latitude, that this is how we are to read it. We don't want to get stuck in a fundamentalist kind of perspective, because when you do, then you run into a lot more problems than if you don't. Okay? So again, the church is wise. And as a good mother, she teaches us how we are to understand the Word of God. Okay? So when we get to the story of Noah, for example, I think it's a lot more literal than we give it credit for. I certainly don't believe the whole thing is a parable. I definitely don't believe that. I think I think there was a real historical event here. I believe Noah was real. And it's not just because I believe it. Part of our faith tells us Noah was real. How can you say that, Chip? Because in the Catechism it says God made a covenant with Noah, and it's still in effect. You don't make covenants with mythic creatures, with make-believe. You hear what I'm saying? It's just like our belief in Adam and Eve. Our faith tells us our original parents were directly created by God, that they were tested and that they sinned. Now, were they, like it's written in here, an Adam and an Eve? Maybe. Probably. But that they were real historic persons. There was a first man and a first woman. Call them whoever you want. Because we're all descendants of them. So there was some real original couple. Am I making sense? Okay? So that is our faith. We have to believe that. Now, whether it's exactly the way it happened in Genesis 3, talking snake, forbidden fruit, maybe not, but maybe so. Okay? That's our faith. Yes?
I think if you're being led into something that is important, I think a poetical introduction, a gentler introduction, may be more a way of bringing it in, and then as it slowly begins, and that may also be historical, and it is, but it's an entrance And if you enter gently, you're more capable of grasping.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like that. I like that. That's a good way to look at it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when, by the way, God was not interested in writing us a science textbook or a Greek-minded history textbook. This was the first, Genesis was written by Hebrews for a Hebrew culture. 1400 BC. So it's a Bronze Age we're talking about, Bronze Age people. So that's completely different than our 21st century mindset. You see that? And these people had no problem differentiating between the poetic and the, what we would call literal. Okay? They hadn't a problem with that because in the Bronze Age, you use story to help illustrate points of understanding. It was the Greeks who separated myth from history for the first time. Prior to that, it was all one. Myth was history. That was history. Okay? The Greeks were the ones to say, no, we can separate fact from fantasy and begin to differentiate fact from opinion. And that was the first time it started to break away. Now we are all about show me the facts. Forget about the fluff. And that's why nowadays we have such a hard time with the book of Genesis, because we so divorce that we can't understand the idea of there being some facts disguised in a poetic manner or in a theatrical manner. We can't handle that. We want to know what happened. Give me a video of what happened that first day of creation. And you know what God says? No, because that's not how all people think. And I'm interested in telling the story so that all people can think it. Got it? So again, God is wiser than us. And he is not interested in placating to our sensibilities. Personally, I'd like it more literal, but that's nice. Get over it. Right? So we move on. In the short amount of time that we have, I want to review where we left off 2 weeks ago about talking about the fall, and we looked at the judgment that fell upon the man. And we talked about men, remember that? Yeah? We talked about how, and I'm going to put it this way, it's in this reporter's opinion, the reason why the judgment, the penance that fell on men was the way it was to teach men how to lead, guard, and protect, because that was the fault of Adam. That was the failing. That was the weakness of Adam. Adam didn't guard, he didn't protect, and he didn't take lead. Okay? When Eve was being seduced by the serpent. Okay? He didn't do anything to stop this. So after the fall, one of the things that God teaches men is you need to lead, you need to guard, you need to step up to the plate. Okay? So this helps explain a lot of salvation history if you look at it in this perspective. Here's another thing. Adam's sin was primarily one of inactivity, omission. He committed a sin of omission, okay? Meaning that he didn't do anything to stop it. He just sat back passively and, if you will, let it happen. That's what we call a sin of omission. Eve's sin, on the other hand, was a sin of commission. She overstepped her limits. Adam understepped his limits. He didn't step up to the plate like he should have. Eve overextended herself. She went over her boundaries. She did a sin of commission, he did a sin of omission. And guess what? Both are wrong. Don't we say that in the Confiteor at Mass? For I have sinned in my thoughts, in my words, in
what I have done
and
what I have
failed to do. So what I have done, sins of commission, active sinning. What I have failed to do, something I didn't do to prevent sin. Both are wrong actions. Both are a weakness of human will. The ability to commit sin and those not to sin. So Adam and Eve, if you will, represent both sides of the sin problem. Man's failing is that he was passive, unable to lead, guard, protect, omission. Eve's sin was one of overzealousness, overstepping her limits. Okay? And consequently, when you look at the penance of both of them, God is telling them, you overstepped, so you pull back, Eve. Man, you understepped, you need to step up, bro. And the rest of human history is all about that. All about that. Okay? So we looked at that YouTube video, you know, that the one from EWTN. I'm not going to play it again because it's long. When you get this link, you can watch the whole thing over again. But that was an excellent book. I was trying to find it at Catholic Answers. They didn't have it. EWTN was there, but of course they're not going to bring their whole religious catalog with them. They were just there. But I would strongly recommend. The book was Turning Boys into Men. Okay? About Catholic mature manhood. Okay? I also recommended these books. These were the books that I read when I was in my master's program in mythology. I found men's psychology to be extraordinarily fascinating, particularly for me. I related a lot in these books. Fire in the Belly by Sam Keane talked about the 3 elements that turn boys into men. The 3 elements.